The number one thing that shows up with post-COVID, interestingly, shows up in almost all these other conditions. It's fatigue, brain fog, difficulty focusing, concentration. Your brain's inflamed. You can't focus, you can't concentrate.
Stress is the inflammation that robs us of life, energy, and happiness. Our typical solutions for gut health and hormone balance have let a lot of us down. We're over-medicated and underserved. At The Less Stressed Life, we're a community of health-savvy women exploring solutions outside of our traditional Western medicine toolbox and training to raise the bar and change our stories. Each week, our hope is that you leave our sessions inspired to learn, grow, and share these stories to raise the bar in your life and home. Today on The Less Stressed Life, I have back Dr. Gary Kaplan, who is a clinical associate professor at Georgetown University School of Medicine, founder and medical director of the Kaplan Center for Integrative Medicine, and author of Why You Are Still Sick, How Infections Can Break Your Immune System, and How You Can Recover. He's a pioneer and leader in the field of integrative medicine, and he's one of only 19 physicians in the country to be board certified in both family medicine and pain medicine. And last time he was here, we talked about neuroinflammation, we talked about depression, fibromyalgia, we talked about sleep stuff. So if that interests you, which I found it was really useful because every time people have full body pain, there's neuro brain inflammation. So we talked about some resources for that. And today we're going to move on to more related to the immune system and long COVID. Welcome back, Dr. Kaplan.
Thank you for having me back on the show. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, I was actually in your neck of the woods last month, and I referred someone to you who was asking me all about her inflammatory symptoms. And I said, you should see a guy who's from this area on this very topic. So I just recalled that.
You're delighted to help.
Yeah, you have a thing coming up. You have a conference coming up that you've been working super hard on, and it's all about the immune system. And I know this is going to publish a little bit after that, but is that just actually, if you don't mind, because last time we talked about your story, so why don't you tell me just a little bit about the conference, because I'm sure it eats up your entire day talking about it, or like planning and thinking about it probably right now. So tell us a little bit about it. Now, when this comes out, it'll be post, but maybe it's even something people can access later.
So going to the website, foundationfortotalrecovery.org or chronicillness.org. So this is a conference on chronic illness. And what we've found is that if you look at chronic fatigue syndrome, and you look at fibromyalgia, and you look at post-treatment Lyme syndrome, and you look at PANS, pediatric acute onset neuropsychiatric disorder, and you look at a whole bunch of neuropsychiatric illnesses, which are depression, anxiety disorders, OCD, and you look at post-COVID, that in fact, there's a whole bunch more in common with these things than there is not in common. And at the basis of what's in common in all these things is the immune system going a bit wacky doodles. So we have experts at the conference who will be talking about psychiatric aspects of these diseases. We have people at the conference who will be talking about the neurologic aspects of this disease. So Dr. Nath, who's head of the Division of Outpatient Neurology at NIH. We have some of the top people from around the world. Dr. Goebbels from Liverpool will be talking about autoimmune fibromyalgia. People from Stanford, Dr. Frankovich, talking about PANS, pandas. So we've got an all-star top-line academic cast to talk about this. And this is open to the public, because we want to educate the public as much as we're educating the profession this stuff. So all of these diseases have a great deal in common. And unfortunately, when COVID came along, it brought all this into the forefront. As you and I were talking briefly before the show, the people who get hospitalized and the people who die because of COVID don't die because of an overwhelming infection. Right? So meningitis, where you get an overwhelming infection and the lung just destroys you. That's not what happens. What happens with COVID is you get an overwhelming response of the immune system. So that's what does the damage. That's what keeps you sick post-COVID. So it's not the living bug itself, but rather it's what the bug does to your immune system, screws up your immune system, that creates so much havoc. And a paper came out just the other day talking about the damage that COVID does in the intestine, into what's called the chromatin cells, your serotonin. People know about serotonin. It's a neurotransmitter. The way neurotransmitters work is that nerves get really close to one another, but they don't touch. They send out little hit of chemicals, and those chemicals are called serotonin and dopamine and norepinephrine. And so that then moves over to the next nerve and sets up a reaction to propagate the signal and keep things going. So in the case of serotonin, 70% of the serotonin is actually produced in the gut, not the brain. And the chromatin cells in the gut are where they're produced. And now this paper has indicated that there's damage to the chromatin cells in the gut as a result of COVID. And that also then depletes serotonin from the system. And that's why we're finding in some people with post-COVID syndrome that giving them a serotonin medication, such as Zoloft, can in fact dramatically improve the condition. So it's our understanding of the way that COVID is damaging the immune system that's helping us understand how to get people to recover from post-COVID and also how to protect from getting post-COVID to begin with. So
okay. This is bringing up lots of questions. Yeah. No, I was going to say maybe we should set the stage with some of the symptoms that you see that are most common long COVID symptoms. There's lots of questions that just came from what you just said, but maybe we should set the stage with long COVID first, and then we can jump to the rest.
The number one thing that shows up with post-COVID, interestingly, shows up in almost all these other conditions. It's fatigue, brain fog, difficulty, focus and concentration. Your brain's inflamed. You can't focus, you can't concentrate. Now, the other thing that COVID has in common with a lot of these other conditions is it hits everything. It hits the heart. It hits the intestinal tract. You have problems with slow digestion or too fast digestion, bloating, gas, constipation, stasis. So you end up with problems with heart. We certainly have heard lots associated with cardiomyopathies. This is generalized inflammation of the heart associated with the virus. We have seen problems with the kidneys. I unfortunately had a couple of patients who've gone into stage 3, 4 kidney failure because of COVID. So COVID can hit pretty much every single organ in the body and damage every single organ in the body. And the blood vessels, we get these microclots that occur that probably result of overactivation of platelets and inflammation of the blood vessels themselves. So it can affect pretty much every system in the body. And people complain of shortness of breath, this difficulty. And it's really interesting because I had COVID early on and I got through my week and a half, 2 weeks of COVID, and it was cleared. And I went to walk to a Vietnamese restaurant that's about a mile from the house. And we're walking to the Vietnamese restaurant a half mile into the walk. I can't breathe. I'm short of breath. I'm feeling like I'm sitting there going, I'm having a heart attack. What's there? I'm not wheezing, but I can't breathe. I had this horrible sense of shortness of breath and I needed to sit down. And it slowly passed and I was able to get to the restaurant. But this is what people experience. It's terrifying. If you don't know what's going on, you're in an emergency room trying to figure it out. And worse is you get to the emergency room and they examine you and everything looks fine.
Yeah.
Because the problem is the sensors in the lung and the sensors in your brain are the reason you're short of breath, not that you're not moving air. It can feel oppressive and it can feel very frightening.
All right, let's just start with that one. What is someone supposed to do in that case? You've experienced it, you've gone through it. Is there really any solution?
Well, so the good news is I'm a doc, so I get hysterical and then my wife comes. Because I'm running through my differential of, oh my God, what is this? I think the reality of the matter is if you're having the experience, certainly the first time you have the experience, you need to be seen by someone because it can be a heart attack. It can be a severe asthmatic attack. And so we want to make sure that you're all right. One thing you can do very quickly is throw pulse ox on, that little device that clips on your fingertips. All of us were told to get when COVID was first raging through. It tells you how much oxygen is in your blood. So being able to look at that and see that your oxygen level is in fact 94+% is very reassuring. If you're looking at that and you're looking at it at under 90, get yourself to the emergency room ASAP. So find out what your heart rate is. Is your heart pounding? Is your heart going over 100? That's a problem. Is your heart regular or irregular? If it's irregular, that's a problem. You need to get to the emergency room. So you can check that by feeling your pulse at your wrist is probably the easiest way. You can also feel it in your neck. So ways of just grounding yourself and going, okay, am I safe or aren't I safe? Mm-hmm. And frankly, if you think you're not safe, you belong in the emergency room. So take a look at you. Make sure
Okay, so we're talking about how it affects every single thing. Here's a couple things that I'm seeing it presented, and then we can talk about all those other systems as well.
Mhm.
I am hearing about cancer rates majorly increasing, which makes sense if it affects the immune system. What do you want to
Mhm.
say about that, if anything?
So again, it's an inflammatory response on the part of the immune system, right? Cancer is in fact a failure of the immune system to keep things in check. We develop cancer cells all the time. What the immune system is supposed to do is run around and go, oh, that doesn't belong there. Let's make that go away. So when the immune system's operating ideally, it makes that stuff go away. If the immune system is not operating ideally, it's overreactive, it's not reacting properly to the things that are coming in, then what's going to happen is your cancer, if you've got a cancer, it's going to flare. And in fact, we see most of our kids who are struggling with PANS, PANDAS, and other neuroinflammatory diseases, they get much sicker when they get COVID, much sicker. And indeed, we've seen people, basically the risk factors for long COVID and the risk factors for worsening COVID hospitalization are obesity, hypertension, kidney disease, all right, so diabetes. So these are factors which we've demonstrated clearly already have attacked the immune system, and COVID makes things much, much worse. So cancer's flaring, not surprising. We've seen glaucoma. We've seen people develop eye problems secondary to senses in terms of taste and smell. Early on, Delta variety of COVID was a big deal with that. We've not seen it so much with Omicron and the latest versions of COVID. So these seem to be a little bit milder in some cases. And we're hopeful we'll see a little bit less long COVID from these.
Yeah, I was actually going to be a question. Back to the people who were really affected by smell and taste issues. If that has not resolved, what's in the toolbox for that these days?
In one sense, we treat it as a neuropathy that's damage to the nerves. And so using an anti-seizure medication such as Neurontin has been helpful for some people. Using a low-dose naltrexone, which helps in terms of inflammation of the central nervous system, has also been helpful for some people. Acupuncture has been helpful for some people. And so we'll definitely have that in our toolbox in terms of what we're doing. And unfortunately, that's pretty much it. This taste and smell stuff is one of the toughest symptoms from long COVID we see in trying to manage it.
And what was happening? Do we know what happened that caused that?
Damage to the cribriform plate. There's a whole bunch of the cribriform plate is up behind your nose, behind your eyes. And there's a whole bunch of little nerves that come down there that they're stimulated chemically. So that's your sense of smell and taste. And that those nerves were damaged as a result of COVID. And that damages your sense of taste. So it's really a neurologic problem, the issue.
Okay. That made me think about some banter I saw that I didn't fully pay attention to about high fevers causing essentially damage to things, having very high fevers for a while. Is that something like, can you speak to that at all?
Think about febrile seizures in kids under 2 years of age. What's going on? What's going on is the brain is immature, the blood-brain barrier is immature, and you start having high fevers, 102, 103, 104 in some cases, and then you have seizures because the brain doesn't do well when basically high fevers break down your enzyme systems and all kinds of cellular processes stop working. So there's an ideal temperature at which the body works, and that's where the enzyme systems converting one thing to another are supposed to work. When you get at high temperatures, all of that starts breaking down. And the next thing, you've got all kinds of problems. And in the central nervous system, especially in little kids, you'll see febrile seizures. In adults, adults don't tolerate high fevers at all. So when you see adults at 104 fever, which is pretty much the upper end of it, you start getting 106 and you are definitely ill to be in the hospital. And so and this is the body's response to try and fight off or kill the bugs. So in one sense, the fever is supposed to be helping us. But in another sense, the high fevers start breaking down our cellular processes, our cellular functioning. And they can do a lot of damage to pretty much every part of the body.
When you go into the hospital for a really high fever, what's the treatment?
First thing, the same thing that we would do outpatient, right? So if we can get you with aspirin or Tylenol, or Motrin, one of the nonsteroidals, we'll control the fever with that. Otherwise, we will pack people on ice. There are medications you can give that are vasodilators in order to kick off some heat from the body. And there are things that we will do in terms of brain, and the nervous system. But those are extreme measures. Basically, you want to control that fever as best you can.
Okay, here's another one that I feel like comes up a lot post-COVID, which is people struggle with alcohol or detoxification. Like they suddenly can no longer tolerate alcohol.
Yeah. So your liver enzymes are not able to process the alcohol the way they used to. And so your detox pathways aren't working. All the detox pathways go through the liver. So simple take-home message, don't do it. I mean, why increase the burden on your liver? But yes, I hear that a lot, that people are not able to tolerate alcohol the way they could. They find that they get drunk after half a drink, and they used to be able to have a couple of beers without a problem. And we simply say, back off, because your enzyme systems are broken down on the liver. It's not detoxifying it. The alcohol is building up in your system much faster. And so it's really important that you stop taxing it like that. And you may need to pay attention to that with medications, because it may change your ability to process. Both medications, when you take them, are what's called pro-medications, meaning that you take them, pro-drugs. You take them and then they go to the liver, and the liver breaks them down. And they break them down into a metabolic byproduct and the active drug. And so you need certain enzymes in order to do that. The people 50 is the best understood of those processes, but you need certain enzymes that are able to be able to break down those drugs. If the liver's impaired, it's going to have trouble processing the drugs, and it may allow for an accumulation of some of the metabolites. That'll make you sicker. It may make it so that it can't effectively convert it into the active form of the drug. So you may need, if you're really sick, we may need to adjust the dosages of the medications that you're taking. The other thing we have to pay attention to is, remember I mentioned that I've seen people go into early kidney damage as a result of COVID.
Yeah.
Then drugs also have to be cleared by the kidney. And so are the kidneys able to do the job they need to do in order to be clear toxins from our body, the drugs from our body? Are they able to regulate? The main thing the kidneys are doing are regulating our electrolyte balance. So can they keep the proper amount of sodium, proper amount of potassium, particular, and calcium in our system, or are we losing them? And now we're getting hypokalemic, too little potassium or too high potassium, which can get you in a lot of trouble in a short time period.
Yeah.
There's a lot of damage that COVID can do to the entire body by disrupting different enzyme systems and doing direct cellular death.
I just like to think that we can be supportive to systems and help some of them improve. Maybe liver detoxification. I think those are possibilities. I think I worked in kidney care for a very long time. I think that can be a little bit tricky. Do you have any opinions, or do you see things improve over time at any point? I think for a long time, we've always thought, hey, once you've got this damage, it's done. But sometimes I think we're surprised also that the GFR can jump around a little bit too.
So first off, there's a number of people that we've seen over the course of a year where they fully recover. So absolutely positively, we see people fully recover. Using glutathione and NAC has been extremely effective in helping people recover. NAC is N-acetylcysteine. Glutathione is the most abundant antioxidant in the central nervous system. When things aren't working well, you're producing lots of reactive oxygen species, reactive nitrogen species. So you're chewing up your glutathione. And so NAC helps build up the stores of glutathione in the body. And there are some case reports of using glutathione in hospitalized patients with COVID, with dramatic recovery. So increasing glutathione stores in the body with NAC and also giving glutathione can be extremely helpful in terms of doing. In terms of the heart, D-ribose can be a very effective vitamin in terms of helping with the heart muscle recovery. D-ribose has been shown to take people from we have stages of heart failure, and it's actually been shown to dramatically improve heart failure on the New York classification by just giving D-ribose. So D-ribose is something I would add to anybody who's having heart problems. Certainly if I have people with just heart failure, but if I have a myopathy secondary to post-COVID, D-ribose is one of the things that we want to use. So lots of things we can do in order to help support the system. High-dose vitamin C can also be effective. Typically, high-dose vitamin C, we're going to be giving IV, though, because we need to give upwards of about 20 grams at a time to do that. We want to make sure that nutritionally you're well supported. Absolutely. Magnesium in your system. We want to make sure your vitamin D levels. Low vitamin D levels is a risk for getting post-COVID and a risk for having more serious COVID. Vitamin D is absolutely essential for the normal functioning of the immune system. And a normal vitamin D level, vitamin D should be part of your normal physical exam. I know what levels are. A normal vitamin D level is set at 30 nanograms per deciliter. I disagree. I think that's too low. The optimal is 50 to 80. And so vitamin D3. So making sure that your vitamin D3 levels are adequate. The other thing that we've found has been helpful is omega-3 fish oils. And so I'll frequently put people on 1.5 grams of mixed omega-3s a day. There's lots we can do and lots we can do to help support you, to keep you healthy. Coenzyme Q10, another one. So if you're under 40, CoQ10, 300 milligrams a day can help in terms of your immune system and help recovery. If you're over 40, you don't tend to convert CoQ10 into ubiquinol, which is ultimately what you're trying to get. So we recommend that you take ubiquinol, again, as a supplement, 300 milligrams.
So I want to talk about some of these things. It would make sense that vitamin D is low in people with long COVID because they already have an inflammatory response, and vitamin D is a sign of longer term inflammation. It's one of the reasons D is low. As with omega-3s, right? So inflammation uses up phospholipids, omega-3s, et cetera. So that's why I think cycling omega-3s into your life is really important. People could take it all the time. It's fine too. It's not a harmful thing. It can be expensive. I think it's good to cycle on and off things and not just be stuck on them. I want to talk about why glutathione works. I want to just walk through that physiologically because I think it's interesting. So we have COVID. It creates damage to the kidneys, to the liver, and it damages the enzymes. Maybe the enzymes are partially damaged because of the fever stuff, maybe the immune stuff. So we know glutathione is this master antioxidant. But you mentioned something, yes, that sometimes when people got high doses of glutathione when they were hospitalized with COVID, they would improve. Why do you think that was? Because that felt like a step before, right? Does that make sense what I'm trying to say? It almost felt like a step before the liver damage. So it's like, why was the glutathione helpful in what was happening with the virus in the body, do you think?
So I believe what was going on is that you have very high cell turnover, and when cells are dying, they're kicking out things, reactive nitrogen species reaction. So if cells die, what happens is things inside the cell leave the cell. Then what happens is the immune system comes back. Okay. The immune system, if you look at microglia in the central nervous system, macrophages, and peripheral, basically what they do, their first job is to go in and clean up the damage. They will, if the problem is a result of a bug, they literally release factors to blow up that bug. So reaction to oxygen and reactive nitrogen species to make the bug die. They will also release a whole bunch of other factors, interleukin factors, as inflammatory factors, interleukin 6, interleukin 10. VEGF. So there's a whole bunch of chemicals that gets released from these immune cells. And their job is to get rid of all the cellular debris, clean everything up. But then they're supposed to stop and send out another set of signals that bring in the general contractors who come back in to clean everything up. If they keep in their hyperreactive phase where they're constantly kicking out destructive factors, okay, cell death, now what's happening is glutathione, which is part of that cleanup process, is depleted severely. So now what happens is you haven't got anything to help clean you up, and you continue to blow things up and damage things. So what's happening is the garbage is accumulating, nobody's removing it.
Yeah, or it could have even been accumulating before, probably, right? Maybe you come in with some backed up trash. That would make sense. That's pretty normal for humans, I feel like, too.
I think you're absolutely correct. And so you've got all this stuff which is accumulated, and now you're running out of the garbage trucks you need in order to remove everything. That's where we need to put more glutathione in the system. Put more glutathione in the system, helping remove all of that trash. Okay? And that's allow the cells a chance to regenerate and rebuild. The trash builds up, nothing moves. Everything gets clogged up. So glutathione is helping in terms of that detoxification process throughout the body and in the central nervous system in particular. And NAC is important because NAC, the rate limiting steps, the thing that stops you from making lots of glutathione is lacking a thing called cysteine. Okay. NAC is N-acetylcysteine. It has two cysteine groups that will actually cross the blood-brain barrier, thus allowing you to make more glutathione. So NAC is the precursor to make glutathione. And so giving glutathione directly is good, but glutathione has a short half-life in the system, meaning it doesn't last very long.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas NAC allows you to actually build it up. So doing both at the same time, especially in an emergent situation, such as sitting in an ICU, is the best way to go about doing this.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You brought up vitamin D. When I think about vitamin D, I also think about vitamin A supporting the immune system. Do you check vitamin A stores, or do you check
Yep.
vitamin? Do you check?
Yeah. Vitamin A also needs to be paid attention to. Zinc, copper need to be paid attention to, and make sure that there are adequate amount of all of that's necessary for a normal functioning immune system.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we make sure that zinc and copper levels are adequate, make sure the vitamin A levels are adequate, along with vitamin C is trickier to measure because it flows in and out of the system so fast. But vitamin C is a superb antioxidant. And when somebody's really sick, high dose vitamin C can help them recover faster.
Mm-hmm. I think we've done a good job talking about solutions before we even go into the background of the immune system. So we'll go to the immune system and talk about that a little bit and nerd out about that next. But before we do, let's go back to that number one most common symptom of fatigue. I feel like everything you mentioned could really help with fatigue, especially the CoQ10 conversation. What else? Last time we talked about low-dose naltrexone. We talked about CBD because we talked about brain inflammation. You're a brain inflammation, neuroinflammation guy. And I would almost wonder, as we're talking about this, if we're having brain inflammation, if people are having a lot of pain all over their body suddenly post-COVID too. So
yes,
anyway, let's talk about the fatigue and the brain inflammation a little bit.
So the fatigue is the thing that's been most intriguing, and for which NIH has now devoted about $1 billion in research funds to go understand that better. And there's a big study that's just getting underway at NIH looking. Now we've begun to understand. So very interesting thing. I was at Health and Human Services on the advisory committee for chronic fatigue syndrome for 4 years until 2018. The biggest issue at the time was nobody believed it existed. So
really hard to get anything done if everyone can't be on the same damn page. Oh, I thought we could move past this point if we devoted dollars to this.
We got to give dollars to it so we do the research, but you got to believe it exists before you give dollars to it.
Yeah.
So the poor patients were being told that they were making it up, that they were malingering, that they were just being horribly abused. And it was in 2018 when finally NIH at a what's called a P2P conference and said, you know what? Chronic fatigue syndrome is real. And we need to study it. And we managed to get a couple of centers established around the country to begin to fund that. We went from about $5 million in funding for the condition, was a joke in research terms, that's not much money at all, to about $25 to $50 million. But now what's happened is fatigue being such a big symptom associated with post-COVID syndrome. The NIH said, wait a minute, we need to understand this better. And huge amount of money is now poured into this. And we now say, yeah, post-viral fatigue, post-infectious fatigue is a real thing. We have a lot to go in terms of understanding it, but in terms of reducing inflammation, centrally, we want to make sure that we're doing things, the stuff we've already talked about. But one of the things we were also coming to understand is with post-COVID syndrome, we weren't also preventing this, right? So it turns out that the vaccinations maybe lower the risk of getting post-COVID by about 10 to 15%. The Paxlovid, which is used for treatment of post-COVID, looks like it lowers the risk of getting post-COVID, maybe another 15%. All right, but metformin is a medication designed for diabetes. We found that during the height of the COVID disaster, what was happening is diabetics who were on metformin had less risk of being hospitalized and less risk of dying if they were hospitalized. We've now done a big study looking at metformin, and it turns out that metformin is a good way to modulate the functioning of the immune system and give us a chance to not develop post-COVID. How big a chance? It looks like somewhere between 40 and 60% decreased risk. So that if you get COVID, one of the prescriptions now, my opinion, based on the research that I've been reading, 500 milligrams of metformin day 1, 1,000 milligrams of metformin day 2, 1,500 milligrams of metformin from day 3 until day 10.
All right, I got
that
questions.
Looks like it's protective. Yes.
All right. Okay, I want to talk about the mechanism of action around metformin, and then I want to talk about nature's metformin, which is berberine or inositol. I guess you could argue maybe both.
Absolutely. You absolutely could.
So metformin is typically the drug given orally to people who don't have crazy blood sugar issue. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's how I perceive it.
You're right.
It's like first
You're
line
right. Type
therapy.
2 diabetes.
Yep. First line therapy. Try this first before we put you on insulin, essentially. So I thought we were going toward, hey, metformin really reduces the risk of post-COVID by pretty much half, because if you have good blood sugar, your life is good. But you're saying it's making a different. Is it the blood sugar that's informing the immune system here, or is there a different role of the drug that's also informing or modulating the function of the immune system? Is my question.
Different role.
Tell me about it.
So the mechanism of action we're looking at specifically for this is an mTOR. So what this does is it modulates the acquired immune system. All right, the immune system that makes antibodies. And so it modulates it so it doesn't become overreactive. Again, what kills you in COVID, or actually very sick in COVID, is the overreactivity of the immune system. And in particular, the acquired. So Mammalian target of rapamycin. It stands for rapamycin, literally made from dirt, fungus that was found on Easter Island. And it does a beautiful job of modulating. We use it as a chemotherapy agent, but we use it to reduce the overproduction of beta cells, B cells in the immune system, where B cells are the antibodies produced. And so what metformin does is it slows the production of those. It doesn't allow them to overreact. And that clearly has some impact in terms of the creation of long COVID. And thus it also has impact in terms of focus and concentration, because it reduces inflammation level. Think of focus and concentration and fatigue as issues as a result of inflammation of the brain. Everything we do that reduces inflammation of the brain can help. So metformin works via that reduction of inflammation. So it stops the overinflammation of the brain that occurs during the acute infection. Doesn't look like it'll prevent the occurrence of COVID, but it sure looks like it can be very useful in preventing the occurrence of long COVID. It could be used. And by the way, metformin is being investigated as an anti-aging drug, because aging is an inflammatory process. And so using things that modulate the inflammatory process, like metformin, can be useful in terms of slowing the aging process, or at least so we think.
I always feel like that's an oxymoron, personally. Anti-aging drug. I always think of drugs being actually more aging or more mitochondrial depleting. Are there other anti-aging drugs?
Oh, good Lord. There's a whole bunch of them on the horizon.
Not my specialty. Told me. I'm curious.
So there's a lot of things that we're looking at in terms of anti-aging. So metformin is certainly one of the big ones out of the gate, and it's currently under study. MSM is being investigated. So MSM is available now, but it's actually for mitochondrial support. And there's studies going on at Harvard where they're actually trying to turn that into a specific pharmaceutical agent for high enough quality. There are some really interesting studies I've seen, or preliminary data that I've seen, where the military is using MSM in terms of, and you can buy this without waiting for the study now. Signal is one of the better brands, commercial interest. But that actually looks like it's really good in terms of mitochondrial repair.
So the military is using MSM for mitochondrial repair? And I don't think of that as a drug.
They're experimenting with it.
But okay.
It is a supplement, but they're going to be turning it into a drug.
There's a little bit of it. And to go back to one step, whatever. I go back, the lesser of problems, maybe. I would rather us be using certain things over others. But how do you make metformin? Just curious. Where does metformin come from? I don't know.
I don't know either, as a matter of an excellent
Just curious,
question,
because
I don't know the answer.
As we jump into anti-aging drugs and we're talking about MSM, I'm like, well, that's not a drug. That's a supplement, which is cool, no problem. And it's fun. It's always fun to hear what the military is like investing research dollars in. It's, why are you guys tell us more about how the military got interested in mitochondria? Thank God. Like, why isn't everybody interested in mitochondria?
Because they need their soldiers to recover quickly. They need their soldiers to be stronger. Guess what? Better mitochondria, stronger soldiers, faster recover.
And they've got really high stress, which degrades the mitochondria, right? Anyway, keep going. Very good. Very good. So MSM.
So the low-dose naltrexone, which we've talked about, also looks like, again, reducing inflammation and reducing aging. A supplement would be in the category of, NAD. NAD looks like it also helps with mitochondrial repair, and another thing that I would consider using. So in terms of the big ones that are sitting there at the moment, those are the ones that are currently under study and have advanced far enough along the way that we can say, yeah, this makes sense. There's a lot more research around, a lot more supplements. There are a couple of things that just very preliminary on the applications. But the fact of the matter is, and the thing to keep in mind is what the real message is, it's possible to modify aging.
Mhm.
It's possible. We now acknowledge that it is possible
Totally.
to modify aging, something we didn't think we could do. We can absolutely modify it. And it's completely reasonable to think in terms of being able to have lifespans potentially of 120, 140, and 160 years.
Oh, that's new, interesting information.
The other drug is Rapamune,
What's that?
and he used in the apnea. So Rapamune is a medication originally developed for treatment of certain types of leukemia. It's a chemotherapy drug. So you want to be very careful about using this. But for the anti-aging community, and in some of the patients with chronic fatigue syndrome, because it modulates, again, it's an mTOR, so it Rapamune, it modulates the functioning of the immune system much more powerfully than metformin does. And so using somewhere between 1 to 6 milligrams a week looks like it may be helpful. This piece is very experimental.
Yeah.
And I'm not recommending everybody run out and try this by any means.
Yeah.
But we have used it with some of our patients for ME/CSF, chronic fatigue syndrome, with good success. Will it be useful for other patients? Will it be useful for what we're seeing also in post-COVID syndrome? Don't know. Again, the big anti-inflammatory factors you need to keep in mind are exercise, meditation, okay, sleep. So these are things that we want to protect our sleep. We want to be getting at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep. At least, but 7 to 8 hours is appropriate. Unless you're a teenager, then 9 to 10. So these things are all things that protect and improve the functioning of our immune systems. So we want to be paying attention. But if you've got chronic fatigue, you also want to be careful about pacing, not pushing. And we find the same thing going on with post-COVID syndrome. We want to make sure that these individuals don't exhaust themselves, because what will happen is they exercise too much, and too much may be walking around the block, and they crash. We don't want crashes or inflammatory. So we want to make sure that's.
And that's a very common human situation. Someone starts to feel better, and so then they want to do more things, and then they feel like crap the next day. And we learn the most through experience. So sometimes it just has to happen.
Some curves are shallower than others.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's fine.
Sometimes you have to stand really far back to see that I have a curve and learn. I want to talk about one other thing we haven't covered in terms of diagnosing long COVID.
Perfect.
So one of the things that we've been doing a lot of research with is cytokines. Remember, cytokines are some of those chemical messengers we talk about that come out of the cell. Bruce Patterson, and I've been doing some research with him and his team, looking at cytokine patterns to help us understand what's gone on with long COVID. And in this particular case, where Bruce believes most of the problem is a particular type of white cell called the non-classical white cell, non-classical monocyte. And what happens to this thing is several things. One is COVID gets in there. And here's the other take-home piece of message here, okay? It gets complicated because we're not sure whether or not you're looking at an active bug that's still creating the problem, meaning I could culture this virus out of you and find that it's still growing, or what we're really looking at is a piece of the bug that continues to annoy the immune system and keep it firing. In the case of COVID, we're fairly certain the majority of the problem is a piece of the bug, probably that S protein.
Mm.
So you can't grow bug. It's not like COVID is still growing inside you like Lyme disease and continuing to do damage because ongoing growth. Rather, now it's all about the immune system. And so in this particular case, Bruce's hypothesis is that the spike has damaged the non-classical monocytes. Two things have happened. One is monocytes, all cells have a normal cycle where they die. Well, to live for so long and then die. Monocytes, 5 days should be out of the system. That screws up the mechanism of that, and you end up with a zombie cell. So this cell continues to live, kinda. It's not doing much except eating up a lot of energy, and it's a senescent cell in a sense. but it's also kicking out lots of inflammatory factors. Specifically, we're measuring cytokines. And Patterson has developed a process for measuring the cytokine levels and has calculated through deep machine learning what the patterns are that are most consistent for long COVID. So it's a way of diagnosing whether or not you have long COVID. And then we have medications such as Maraviroc, which was originally developed for treatment of HIV. We use low-dose naltrexone in some of these people. We use statins, can be anti-inflammatory. Okay, we may need, there's a specific cytokine called the SCD40L. That is a cytokine inflammatory factor produced by platelets. And so hyperactivity of the platelets. And so that may be contributing to the microclots that we're seeing. Using low-dose aspirin can be effective for that. Using nanokinase can be effective for that. That would be a supplement. And so lumbrokinases, their form. So we're using the cytokine diagnosis in order to help us get another picture in terms of how the immune system has been damaged and then things we can do in order to treat it. Now, we also have used the cytokine diagnosis to look to differentiate the pattern with chronic fatigue syndrome and differentiate the pattern from chronic Lyme, post-treatment Lyme syndrome. So we're getting to a point with these cytokine diagnoses of being able to classify diseases according to specific inflammatory patterns that we're looking at for them. And this is work ongoing. Some of it's been published, not all of it, yes. But Bruce Patterson's work through N-Cell Diagnostics has been pioneering this work. And we've been privileged to be able to do some studies with looking at this. So I think that's an important diagnostic tool.
Yeah, I was going to say, it doesn't sound like it's a tool that's available broadly yet, right? Quite yet.
It's available broadly. You can get that test done throughout the country. Physicians can order it, but you can also, if you call up N-Cell, they actually have a physician online. They can put you in touch with people and they can order, many times they can order the test in your state.
Interesting.
So you can get that cytokine study done.
Or
INCEL.
Got it.
N-Cell.
I always think about cytokines
NCL.
just being like a pile of inflammatory mediators. And so it sounds like you're getting specific looking at which ones are really most prevalent, maybe? Is that somewhat?
It's the balance of cytokines, okay? And cytokines are both inflammatory. So interleukin-6 is pretty much always inflammatory. But interleukin-10 is the balance of that and is typically anti-inflammatory. Interleukin-4 swings both ways, depending on the environment that it's in. So different cytokines are always inflammatory. Other cytokines are anti-inflammatory. They bring the inflammation down. And yet other cytokines change according to the environment they're in to be inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. So as we understand this, and recently there was a paper that came out in New England Journal looking at cytokine differentiation for autoimmune diseases and being able to say, you know what, in this particular type of rheumatoid arthritis, these are the cytokines that are active. And as such, this medication would be a better choice than even though this person also has rheumatoid arthritis, this set of cytokines is active and these medications would be a better choice. The cytokine diagnosis is going to open up a whole new area of being more specific in our diagnosis and being more specific in terms of directing our therapies.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I wonder how far that could really span. I feel like it could span farther than the drugs. I don't know. I'm just rolling it around in my head. It's interesting because my original education around the immune system had to do with a lot of like food reactions. I've grown from that dramatically, but there's when the immune system is feeling haywire for XYZ reason, it throws a lot of inflammatory mediators at foods sometimes, like different cytokine or different types of mediators. So anyway, just thinking about that a little bit.
It's an important thing to think about because remember what I said is that COVID can absolutely impair the motility of the intestinal tract, which is going to completely screw up your gut microbiome, which will create a leaky gut.
Yeah.
So now it's exactly correct. And so we have to be very thoughtful in terms of, we'll take people off as we're rehabbing them. We talk about a hypoallergenic diet, rice, fish, chicken, fresh fruits and vegetables. I've taken them off as such gluten. I've taken them off milk and milk products. I've taken them off soy, taken them off corn. Because those are the most common, not all of them, but they are the most common allergenic agents in terms of our food. Though unfortunately, in my case, so is eggplant.
Yeah. And sometimes I respect all of those positions, and I've done a lot of those. And then I will also just like devil's advocate say that when they're really depleted in nutrients and there's a lot of immune system chaos, and this is just, I'm just opening this for both options, right? That sometimes that creates more chaos or people have more reactions because there's other things. Like the immune system needs to calm down.
Right.
The immune system needs to calm down so it can tolerate the foods. And sometimes removing the foods will work. And I've had the experience several times where sometimes it doesn't. So I'm just leaving that open so people know that both situations can happen. And guess what? There's options. Like you don't have to be reactive to foods, I guess would be the main point there. So,
And I think, Krista, to your point, it's extremely important that we individualize what we're doing with people.
for sure.
It's not one size fits all. And
Totally.
you're absolutely correct. You need somebody who will think outside the box, who will think in terms of herbal approaches, who will think in terms of, you're right, it may not be the foods. There may be significant bacterial overgrowth in the gut that needs to be addressed. There may be motility problems in the gut that need to be addressed. So it's complicated, and you need somebody to partner with you and work this through more individualized, not one size fits all. Other medication I want to talk about briefly is methylene blue.
All right.
Methylene blue can also help repair mitochondrial function. Methylene blue, as such, can help repair your energy. Okay? Help address the fatigue. Now, it may be if you're so depleted, we have to start at a very low dose of methylene blue, 5 milligrams a day. Okay? And then gradually build that up. Methylene blue has to be compounded. It's not something available over the counter. And you have to be attentive to it because it can also interact with serotonin medications and cause an overdose of serotonin in your system. So if you're taking a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor or some of the antidepressants, you have to be very careful. It acts as what's called an AOI. So you need to, it's an extremely valuable drug in terms of helping repair mitochondrial function. It's an extremely valuable drug in terms of being able to help you recover not just your energy, but also can help in terms of balancing your psychiatric stuff, balancing the nervous system, brain. High doses, it's actually been used for treatment of bipolar depression.
How long have you been using that?
Methylene blue? Probably about 3-4 years.
Oh, cool. To recap that, start small, could interrupt your sleep maybe as the negative.
Would interrupt your sleep? Unlikely, unless you're overdosing on serotonin. But more commonly, what it's going to do is it's going to start rebuilding you. So it's going to start helping you, your mitochondrial functioning again, because that's the basis of your powerhouse of the cell, right? So everything you can do to help repair mitochondria is going to ultimately benefit your energy. So you're right. We've talked about fatigue from the standpoint of inflamed brain, but the other piece of fatigue is mitochondrial dysfunction. And so being able to do things to help repair the mitochondria is extremely important.
Yeah, cool. I love that. I think we did a great job serving the listener today. Bottom line, what you just said, fatigue can both be inflamed brain and need for rebuilding, nutrient stores, mitochondria, et cetera. Couldn't agree more. I think that's awesome. Love it. We talked about all these different organ systems and how they're influenced. You got into some nerdy stuff there. You talked about things that help each system. Love it. You brought up the whole cytokine, I'm going to call it diagnostics. And so that's almost another conversation for another day. Anything else you feel like you really want to make sure we include? I know that was a loaded question, but
we covered a lot of territory. I think
we did good.
But I also want to emphasize the importance of individualization. It's not one size fits all. There's a lot of evolving information very quickly. I think people should maintain hope because we keep coming up with better answers all the time. This conference that chairing next week is about bringing together some of the top specialists in the world to talk about this stuff and get better answers and get us cooperating with each other, breaking out of our silos and having conversations across specialties, across research fields so that we come up with much better answers. I'm excited about what's coming down the pike. I'm excited about AI in terms of being able to factor in genetics and epigenetics and proteomics, better diagnostics. We've been using AI already, deep machine learning for the cytokines. I think the future is bright. I think that there's reason for hope for a whole array of things, not just post-COVID, but for all these other conditions we're talking about, chronic fatigue syndrome, pain syndromes. But I also see it in terms of multiple sclerosis. I see it in amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. And perhaps another time we'll have a long conversation about stem cells.
Yeah. Hey, I'm here for it. I'd love it. Okay, cool. I hope to catch some of the conference online. I hope that people are listening to this and it's past that time, which it will be, that they can access some of that stuff if they're interested.
They can. It'll still be online.
And where do you want people to find you online, Dr. Kaplan?
Finding me online is kaplanclinic.com. Finding the foundation online is foundationfortotalrecovery.org. And that'll also get you then access to the recordings from the conference. It'll also let you sign up for the conference.
Cool. Thank you so much, Dr. Kaplan. It feels like you're living in your zone of genius and synthesizing all of your life experiences into something that is hoping to, I think, for sure, impacting the world. So thank you for your work. I know putting on an event like that is not an easy, it's not an easy thing. So I hope it goes.
Active psychoses.
Yeah, I hope you have fun. I hope you have fun when it arrives and it's not stressful for you. And someday we'll talk about stem cells. Okay.
Kristen, thank you very much for having me on the show. Thank you for all the work you're doing in informing your audience, educating people, letting them know there's a path to getting better.
Yeah, thank you.
Sharing and reviewing this podcast is the best way to help us succeed with our mission to help integrate the best of East and West and empower you to raise the bar on your health story. Just go to reviewthispodcast.com/less stressed life. That's reviewthispodcast.com/less stressed life. And you'll be taken directly to a page where you can insert your review and hit post.